Welcome everyone to the Preschool Mindfulness Summit. I'm really excited to introduce you today to two guests, Jennifer Miller, who was on our Preschool Summit last year, so some of you might recognize her, and Shannon Wanless is joining us as well this year. So hello and welcome to both of you.
Thank you. It's good.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk with you.
Great. So I just want to tell you a little bit about both of these wonderful ladies. Jennifer is the founder and developer of the site Confident Parents, Confident Kids, which is an amazing resource for parents. I highly recommend that you go and check it out. There's so many practical games and ideas and tools on there, and lots of drawings, which I recently found out Jennifer actually does herself. So that's pretty cool that she also illustrates them. And she's been a contributor with the NBC Parent Toolkit and has worked with parents and kids for many years. And then Shannon Wanless is here with us. She is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology and in Education, and also the director of the Office of Child Development at the University of Pittsburgh. And her research focuses on helping early childhood educators use social emotional teaching practices to improve children's sense of psychological safety to learn at school. So welcome both of you, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, they have very kindly given us a is it a PDF? I think so. Called How Learning Happens, which is a parent, caregiver, educator communication tool. So, do you want to just tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. This was created for the Aspen Institute, who's doing a campaign on how learning happens, and the idea behind how learning happens is that it is social and emotional. In other words, we require a caring learning environment in order for students to learn, and we also need to build and be cognizant of children's social and emotional development in order for them to learn. And also, they need to have a trusting relationship with their teacher in order to learn, and with their peers. So that's kind of the idea behind how learning happens. And Shannon and I worked with the Aspen Institute. We created a conversation tool for parents to go to their teachers, go to their schools and say, how are you addressing these key issues like empathy, like teaching responsibility, like teaching social awareness. So the idea with the tool is, here's something that parents can take very easily, share with their teacher, and they're just some simple conversation starters.
Yeah, oh, I love that. That's what a great idea, and so useful for parents who sometimes I get asked, what should I ask when I go visit a preschool? So that would be a great resource for everyone. So let's dive into our questions. So we hear a lot about social emotional learning in schools, but sometimes less so in kind of parenting circles. So do you think this is a good fit with parenting, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you would define it in the context of parenting?
Shannon, you want to take this one?
Sure. I'll jump in and say Jennifer and I have spent a lot of time talking about this exact question and thinking about it over the last year or two. And one thing that we've really come to is that there are these two related aspects of social emotional learning with parenting. The first being about the adults themselves and how social emotional learning matters for them and their own skills so that they're able to use it in their parenting. But then also thinking about their children developing social emotional skills and what is developmentally appropriate in terms of expectations and trying to support in your child as they grow up and as you have multiple children growing up.
I love that because we often, I think it's common, and we always hear, like, what can we do for the kids? What can we do for what are the strategies for the children? So I love that you include the parents' own social emotional skills and learning, because obviously that has a huge effect. So tell us about the research that you conducted recently that connects kind of the parenting and the social emotional learning and how it might help parents on a everyday basis.
Well, we interviewed, we gave questionnaires to people who were both social emotional professionals, so something in their work life was centered around social emotional learning, but also that they were parents and parents of different age children. And it was really, really informative to talk to these people who sat at that intersection, who could cross both worlds and say, yes, I know some of the jargon, the professional jargon, and I know about some evidence-based practices, and I use these in my daily life. But now let me put my parenting hat on and think about how does this apply in my own life? And really, as we were doing this, Jennifer and I were talking about ourselves in the same roles as parents and professionals, and how we take the things that we think about on a regular basis at work and say, wait a minute, I'm struggling with this with my child too, or what's going on in my parenting that I'm trying to figure this out. And so when we gave this questionnaire to people who have those dual roles, we were able to see that switch back and forth. And really, one of the things that jumped out at us from our findings is that it is not an easy translation, even for people who think about this for most of their time, like us. And so thought really more translational work is needed to ask ourselves, what are the words that parents are using when they talk about social emotional skills? They aren't using jargon. Even people who know the jargon, when they switch to talking about their children, are not using jargon.
Right.
And also, what are the things that they hope for their children and for themselves as parents? Where are those links? Because they definitely are there with social emotional learning.
Yeah. Wow, so interesting. And it's really interesting what you said, that sometimes, because I'm one of them too, like, we're immersed in this field, and yet sometimes it doesn't always translate perfectly into your own parenting style. So tell us a little bit more about some of the other findings that you got from this research project.
Well, we did. Shannon alluded to the fact that we asked parents and who are also professionals to share their hopes for their children and then their hopes for their own parenting. And we really examined the language that they used. And so when they described hopes for their children, they would say things like, we want children to be confident, we want them to be empathetic, kind, loving, resilient, happy. So they were qualities that you would expect when you're talking about your hopes for your children. And we really looked at what's the crossover with social and emotional skills? How would if we care about promoting empathy, or we care about having kids who are confident or resilient, what are the skills that we would need to marry with them? And when we looked at the scientific definitions of social and emotional competencies, and specifically we used the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning's framework, CASEL's framework, the 5 skills, and they mapped on directly. So the same breadth, so the same depth of qualities that we were looking for were also in those skills. So like so I'll name the skills. You know them well, Helen, but for listeners, that would be self-awareness, which would really align with happiness, with a sense of well-being, optimism, then self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. So we looked at, and we'll share, we have a really nice simple illustration of those hopes aligned with those skills that we'll share with you and your listeners. But interestingly, I think we took from it in our research and our conversations and our own struggles to talk about the professional research and then talk about our personal parenting, that we speak with the heart with our parenting, and the language that we use is from our heart. And when we're in our professional mode, we are very much in our heads. And so that it is tough to make that translation. And so we're really interested in making that translation. So the other set of words that we looked at were parents' hopes for their own parenting. Who do you want to be as a parent? And so parents said things that you would expect, like, I want to be patient, I want to be loving, I want to be understanding, I want to be consistent, I want to have high expectations. And again, Shannon and I and Roger Weisberg was a part of this research, looked at the alignment with skills. Can we map on skills with these things? And again, there was a direct alignment with social and emotional competencies. So bottom line, one of our messages is that there's a wealth of research that we can learn from if we don't get hung up on the language, and we begin to open the door by using parent language and speaking in our, because we're all parents, right? In our parenting language when we try to translate the research.
Yeah, I love that. And I think sometimes just because I've worked around the world, like, language is so important with when I've been working in the educational context, and half the people don't know what the other half are talking about because you're using some kind of jargon from the UK or from another place. So I love that you've identified that as a great strategy for parents to use. So tell us a little bit about maybe some of the more practical examples that some of the viewers might be able to use to develop social emotional skills or mindfulness with their preschool age children.
Shannon?
Well, I think some of these connections that Jennifer was describing with the skills that CASEL describes were so exciting to us, because what they felt like was that there are closer relationships with what's happening in schools and what teachers are learning to do with children to develop social emotional skills than maybe we thought there were in the past. So people may be talking in a different way between home and school, but actually there is a wealth of knowledge in schools. There's been so much research around evidence-based practices in schools for teaching children social emotional development. And so that is not as far removed as maybe you might think initially, and tapping into some of those things that are happening in classrooms and doing some of the legwork to figure out this isn't a direct translation. We should not be handing all the activities teachers are doing right to a family and saying, you should do this at home. But we're not starting from scratch here. We can look at what's available and figure out what makes sense to parents. Yeah. But the most important thing that I feel like I need to say around that is that we often see in classrooms a real emphasis on here's the evidence-based intervention. You should do this exactly the way it was developed for your classroom, maybe with a little tiny bit of room for adaptation. Mm-hmm. And that is really not what it looks like with families. Families have different cultures and values and backgrounds and things that they believe in. And while it may be universal that they're looking for happiness and loving relationships with their children, they may, really have a lot more variability in the ways that they teach their children that. And so there is something to learn from school-based research, but also I think schools have a lot to learn from families about how the pathway to teaching that has a lot more room for cultural responsivity to different family types and backgrounds and beliefs.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's so true. I mean, the world's changing, every year, isn't it? And there's so many different types of families and ways families are working within themselves. And we definitely need to take that into account. But I think it's great that, it's not starting from scratch, that there's something there that can be adapted. That's already, if we know it's working well in schools, then maybe that can transfer into the family life. So very interesting. So Jennifer, tell us a little bit about how we might kind of promote the area of social awareness in the home with families of preschoolers.
Sure. I think it's really important with preschoolers as a family to take on, and actually also for educators to take on a learning agenda related to emotions. We know that children are pre-literate, they're learning language in many forms, and they are very much learning about their emotions. They receive those sensations in the body, they have the reactions, but they don't always make the association between the feelings in their body, like their sweaty palms or their red cheeks when they're getting frustrated, and the actual feeling of frustration and being able to label that. So I think as both parents and educators, it really helps for us to notice, to be mindfully aware of our young children and what they're experiencing, what we see on their faces, and put names to it, reflect back to them. Oh, you look worried, is that right? Or you look concerned, is that right? So we are helping build their emotional vocabulary, and then also accepting their feelings. And accepting seems like such a basic concept, but so often we're very busy and we don't have time for the pain. So, if our child is looking, has angst on their face, and we've got a deadline, or we're trying to zoom off and have time pressures, we may just quickly say, you're fine, move on, or try to. And in fact, we know that that's not helping them become self-aware and also socially aware. Once they begin to name and understand their own feelings, they can begin to name and understand other people's feelings. And it works in an interactive way like that. So as we name our own feelings, as we name our children's feelings, they can become more adept at understanding those big sensations that are happening in their bodies.
Yeah, I love that, Jennifer, and I agree. Like, the younger we can teach kids to kind of be able to put names on it through stories or however we do that, I think it really helps children to be able to just get it out and not keep it bottled inside, doesn't it? So,
yes.
So maybe tell us now about the other side, about social awareness. So how can we help preschoolers kind of develop in that area?
Shannon, you want to take this one?
Sure. I think it's very connected to what Jennifer was just saying. But it also, I think, is worth mentioning the relationship between what she was saying and mindfulness, because this ability to really stop, practice the ability to stop and notice what's happening in your body, as Jennifer was just saying, and really notice also what's happening in your mind. So are you able to keep your attention on what you're thinking or what you're feeling for a moment long enough to notice what that is? And then the next step, as Jennifer was saying, to be able to name it and develop the vocabulary to name it. The same is true when we're interacting with other people. I know for many of us, the inclination is to focus on ourselves, what we might say or what we want to say, but when you practice that on yourself, stopping, noticing what's going on and naming it, then you can also start to think, what are the people around me wondering about? What are they feeling? What are they experiencing right now? So that when you're with them, you can stop and say, I notice their face looks different right now. I notice maybe their eyes are shut, or I notice that they're looking down. I notice they're not talking as much. Let's pause for a minute and ask, what's going on? What are you feeling? So it's really the same skill set that you develop in mindfulness. Stop, put a pause between that default reaction, and take advantage of that to be a little more intentional.
Yeah, I love what you said about taking that pause. I think it's so important to teach young children that it's okay to have that pause, because it seems society, we're rushing around, getting busier and busier, and I think especially parents, sometimes we're rushing out of the house and got to get to hockey practice or whatever it is, and taking that time to just pause is so important. So let's move on to maybe talking about self-management, responsible decision-making skills, and how we might bring some activities or some resources into a household to help preschoolers develop those.
Well, responsible decision-making, interestingly, in our research, we not only focused on what parents can do with their children, which I will provide examples of, but also the fact that parents have such a challenging role in making responsible decisions for their children's safety and well-being throughout the course of their lifetime. And also, often parents are dealing with multiple developmental levels in a household. So they're dealing with ages and stages of 6-year-olds and 8-year-olds and 14-year-olds. And the ways that they go about thinking through decisions and parenting are very different according to various ages and stages. So parents are deep diving, very highly engaged in thinking about responsible decision making and how to become responsible decision makers when it comes to their children. When you're thinking about promoting it as a parent or as an educator in a preschool child or in any young children, I think it's really important to talk about if-thens. So how can we project into the future? If you play with the toy now, what will happen, later today? Or if we choose to play now and we have these tasks to do, like cleaning up and helping put stuff away, then what are we giving up later? So having these conversations often about, if you make this choice, what do you think will happen? And sharing ideas and not giving necessarily answers, but just allowing the child to go through that thought process of, well, if I take my brother's toy, he might cry. He might be really upset. If I take my favorite toy out, he might take it from me. That might be, you're right. So how can we think about the if-thens to help begin that thought process of there are always outcomes to my choices. And I always have a chance to think through the various options. There's not just one. There's always these chances to think through multiple choices and what the impact will be, particularly on the people around me.
Right. I love that, Jennifer. Such a great strategy to get kids talking and thinking about, what are the different outcomes that will happen, or and just preparing them for what's coming up during the day. I think that's a great tool. So what about developing children's self-management skills?
So I'll jump in on this one. This is one I've actually thought about even more than the others from previous work I've done. And I think the two things that have been most effective that I've seen with young children are to name the strategies for them that you're teaching them for self-management. So, for example, when you have to wait, or you have to do something you don't want to do, what are you going to do to get yourself through that? And I know many parents, including myself, would jump to distraction or jump to playing a game with your child like I Spy while you're waiting in a line. And while those are very good things to do, the act of naming it for the child so they can see, the reason I'm going to start a game of I Spy with you is because we have a long time to wait, and this will help us wait. So they can start to notice there's a strategy happening and I can take it on. And then the second piece of that is not being afraid to name yourself as an adult using a strategy.
Okay.
So maybe the child doesn't have to wait. Maybe you have to wait for something that still needs to be in the oven for 20 more minutes and you're really hungry for dinner. So actually taking the time to notice that challenge to your own self-management and then say directly to the child, I'm really hungry. It's very hard for me to wait right now. I need to figure out what I'm going to do to get myself through these 20 minutes and talk through it together. Lets them see you modeling that instead of feeling like you just have to get through that and keep a happy face on with your child. Bringing them on that journey with you is a teaching moment itself.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. There's such simple things, but actually remembering to do them and, vocalizing or describing what we're doing, I think it could be so helpful. So great ideas that parents can use for sure. So let's talk about the last one, relationship skills. How can we encourage preschoolers to develop more of those skill sets?
I think, Shannon talked a bit about modeling, and I think with relationship skills, young children are keen observers of our relationship skills. And I think when we are really intentional, active listeners with our children, even when they have a jumble of ideas and they're tripping over their words because they're so excited to tell us, if we shut off our phone, even if it's a discipline where it's 5 minutes a day, but we set our phone to the side and we just completely focus on the act of listening to our child with eye contact, with good listening skills, all right? We're engaged, we're using eye contact, we're nodding, we're smiling as they share ideas. That kind of interactive dialogue with our child automatically builds really important relationship skills. And as a bonus, they feel a more trusting connection with us, so that when they have problems, they know they can come to us and we will actually listen to them with the intent to support or help. So I think it can be that simple, that we really commit to or devote time, even if it's small, in a day, to having that listening kind of dialogue with our young child.
Yeah, I love that, Jennifer. And I think you like, technology is becoming more and more prevalent, isn't it? And that ability to just be present with your child, I think is so important. So thank you both for sharing all those really practical ideas with us for developing those kind of social emotional skills in children. Now let's talk a little bit about how can parents and educators maybe work better together or more closely together to help a child thrive in this arena. Do you have any? I know your tool would be a good one.
Yeah. Well, I know we both have a lot of tips on this topic, so maybe I can share a few ideas and then turn it to Shannon. But I would say that parents have a whole lot of insight about a child's development that is very different than what the insight the teachers will have. And both will have really valuable insights into how a child is developing and different aspects of their development, whether it's academic, cognitive, social, emotional, physical. So I think parents and teachers coming together to dialogue about a child's development and what they notice, what they see, where they're lending support is a really important start. Not from any kind of judgment platform, but much more as we are partners, just like spouses or life partners would be with each other. And we very much need to coordinate on how we are supporting our development. So that's kind of how I like to think about it. I know, Shannon, I'm sure you have other ideas.
Well, I'll just say keeping the conversation open. This sounds like something that we talk about all the time and maybe assume is happening, but I don't know that it's happening as much as it could be. So when you have parent-teacher conferences at the beginning of the year and asking parents, what are your hopes and dreams for your child? Likely you will hear a lot of social emotional development in that conversation. And it takes a lot of discipline on the teacher's side to remember it is not then their teacher's responsibility to teach the parent how to notice or deliver the skills for those hopes and dreams. It's about an opportunity to partner together and learn from each other about that. So it really would need to be an ongoing conversation of a teacher saying, I noticed this between your child and another child at school, maybe a relationship skills issue. Tell me more about if you notice any of that at home. How do you deal with that at home? What's going on there? I'm wondering if I could deal with it in a way that aligned better with what's happening at home. And then maybe we could at the same time be sending similar messages to the child so we can be on the same page and more effective. So really intentional conversations that are not just running down the report card of I see these skills and these skills and these skills in academic areas, but jumping right into we have an opportunity to partner even more closely in the social emotional areas.
I love that. That's beautiful. I would love that if that could happen in every school. What a great thing that would be. And I love the idea, of course, of a partnership between the teachers and the parents, and really diving in, as you said, and not kind of doing those superficial tick boxes that we so often see linked to different skills in preschool. So thank you both for sharing those great ideas. So just before we end today, what would be the one big takeaway that you would like our viewers, parents and educators, to take away from the research that you've done that will stick in our minds?
Go ahead,
okay. I guess I will say the one takeaway I would share would just be that because parenting is so challenging, and because we can use all the support we can get, there's a lot out there on simple, practical ways to put the valuable research on social and emotional skill building in kids into place in family life. And so Shannon and I are eager to be sharing resources, and Helen, I know you're constantly sharing resources. There's a world of good information out there, and sometimes it's making the connection between what's happening, the good things that educators are doing in schools in order to promote children's social and emotional development, and then asking the question, how can I apply this to my family life? What makes sense in my parenting? How can I use this great knowledge to my advantage as a mom or a dad?
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true. I think, the more that we can find out about all these resources and think, how can we apply them in different parts of our life, and just be more aware, more open to different ideas, and tweaking, what works in one context to another, is definitely going to help preschoolers with the thrive really in their lives, which is what we all want, I know.
Yeah.
Shannon, do you have any last words for us today?
I'd agree. There are a lot of resources out there. And so as parents, we're quick to jump on reading books to our children or playing games that promote math skills. But it really takes a pause to ask yourself, what do I wish I was able to help my child develop in social emotional learning? What is normal to expect or typical to expect? And how am I fostering that? And it's not as mysterious as it sounds. There are little games and tips all over the internet that are probably more directed toward educators than parents at this point, but going to your child's teacher and saying, I'm trying to teach, think of some games or books or activities to teach making friends or noticing emotions. How do you recommend doing that? Will probably give you some lower hanging fruit that you can use at home, just like you would for reading or math or anything else.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. And I think, the more parents and teachers and educators work together, the better things are going to be for all the children at school. So thank you both, Shannon and Jennifer, for joining us on the Preschool Mindfulness Summit. I really appreciate you sharing all those really practical tips, and also the research that you've done, which I look forward to reading. And I'm sure some of our viewers will as well. And also for that great tool, which if you click on the resource button below this video, you can download that, and you can find out more about Shannon and Jennifer on their speaker bios. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye. Bye.